We all want to know how to improve volunteering and rail preservation. Today on the Roundhouse, we're going to get some answers to explore that big question. All aboard!
In days past, the Roundhouse was where the railroad worker united with the steam locomotive, each to prepare for the journey ahead. Today, it's where we examine the history, the industry, the machines, the hobby, and the passion behind railroading. News, interviews, stories, and more. So climb aboard. This is the Roundhouse.
Welcome to the Roundhouse. I'm your host, Nick Ozerak, and this is episode number 129 of our Trains and Railroading podcast, where we're talking about everything in the industry and the hobby. You name it, and we discuss it. Today, we are having our first panel conversation on the topic of volunteerism and rail preservation. We are talking to representatives from the Wiscasset, Waterville, and Farmington Railway, the Fort Wayne Railroad Historical Society, and the Pennsylvania Trolley Museum to answer your questions that many of you submitted to explore this very complex question and hopefully get some interesting insights that we can take home with us. It was a really fun conversation, and I can't wait for you to hear it. Before we get to that, though, first, I want to thank those of you who are supporting the Roundhouse on Patreon, such as Jackboy317. Jackboy became a boilersmith, which means that he's getting early access to episodes and participating in a monthly hangout with yours truly and other supporters of the Roundhouse. If you want to support the podcast and what we're doing here, go to patreon.com/the Roundhouse. I'd also like to thank the sponsors of today's episode. First, the Strasburg Railroad. Learn more about how their mechanical services department can help with your restoration project by emailing mechanical@strasburgrailroad.com. And Rail and Road Auctions, which specializes in railroad collectibles and memorabilia. You can see what auctions they have coming up at bidrar.com. Our topic today is volunteering and rail preservation, and I am pleased to present three wonderful panelists who are going to be joining us today to talk about this. First, from the Pennsylvania Trolley Museum, volunteer coordinator Kristen Fredriksen. Second, from the Fort Wayne Railroad Historical Society, the volunteer coordinator, that is Christopher Homco. And lastly, from Wiscasset, Waterville, and Farmington Railway, the Trainmaster, Ed Lecuyer.
Hi, Nick. Thanks for having us.
It is great to have you on board today. So first, I want to get to know you guys and your organizations and your approaches to volunteering a little bit more. So let's start with you, Kristen.
Sure. So I have actually worked at 3 different transportation museums, and each of them is at a different place on the spectrum when it comes to volunteer staff ratios. At the Southeastern Railway Museum, where I started, it's almost all volunteers. Some part-time staff. Executive roles are all by volunteers, though. I also worked at the Delta Flight Museum, which is the complete opposite, where it was a bigger staff, very few volunteers, mainly in docent roles. And now I'm at the Pennsylvania Trolley Museum, and we have a balance of paid staff and volunteers. We have our paid staff in the executive leadership and director roles, and volunteers as department managers and the folks who keep the trolleys moving. The Pennsylvania Trolley Museum opened to the public in 1963 and was founded by a club of trolley enthusiasts. And we've grown now to have about 30,000 visitors per year with 2 miles of track and 3 campuses, hoping to open a 21,000 square foot welcome and education center later in 2023. Our first paid staff member was an executive director in the early 1990s. And since then, our paid staff has grown to 7 full-time and 1 part-time at the moment. But on a regular day, the chances are that a visitor will interact almost exclusively with volunteers, because our trolley operators and our tour guides are all volunteers. We've got about 125 total.
Very good. And Chris, what do you have going on in Fort Wayne?
Hi, so I'm Chris Homco with the Fort Wayne Railroad Historical Society. I've been with the organization for going on 7 years now, and prior to that 7 years, I had zero experience with trains, which I think gives me kind of a unique perspective going into all of this, because I come from a management background, and on the other end of the need for dollars, I come from a background where I used to be in charge of giving out the dollars for a major for a major company in America. And so now I get to see the other side of it. And then along the way, come to find out I'm really into this too. Fort Wayne is a little unique from everybody else here. We are 100% volunteer from top to bottom. There's not a single paid individual anywhere within the organization except for outside contractors we hire for work. The main focus of us is more of a traveling circus. We don't have the home base that you guys have where you can set up operation and run regular. We're working on it for those of you that pay attention. But we are guns for hire, an engine and a crew that will come and work on your railroad. And we're working towards creating our own home in Northeast Indiana with the Indiana Rail Experience and a partnership with the Indiana Northeastern Railroad that I think most people are aware of last year. We're going into our second year this year, hoping that that grows and blossoms. You might also be familiar with the Headwaters Junction project. You can start to put pieces together and see the natural progression of what's happening in Northeast Indiana. But we are currently all volunteers. That is not the end goal. We've always been all volunteers, and we're starting to realize that paid staff has its advantages, which I'm sure we'll talk about today. So I do see that in our future. But that's Fort Wayne.
Excellent. And Ed, what do you have going on with the main 2-footers?
Yeah, so I'm Ed Lecuyer from Trainmaster at the Wiscasset, Waterville, and Farmington. If those who aren't familiar with our railroad should go check out Roundhouse episode 116 from January of 2022. We had a full interview about what we do up here in Maine. But we're unique also in that we're not really a tourist railroad per se. We're really rebuilding what was once the Wiscasset, Waterville, and Farmington during the common carrier era. From 1894 to 1933, this little 2-foot gauge railroad was a common carrier railroad through the woods of Maine, and closed, abandoned, scrapped, all that stuff. And then in 1989, a single individual started to purchase what was left of the right of way and started rebuilding it. So what we do today is really a continuation of that railroad. And starting from 1989, now 33 years later, we've laid 3.5 miles of track, built a whole bunch of buildings, restored locomotives. We're building a locomotive. We're building some railroad cars, it's fun stuff like that. And like Fort Wayne, we're all volunteer. So we do not have any paid staff. Again, we have contractors that we come on board for time to time, including a full-time contractor who's dedicated to the operations end of the railroad. And one who oversees our building construction projects, but they kind of grew out of our volunteer program. So they're very much, they give as much as they work, and then some. Let's see, the way that we operate, it permeates to the whole organization, especially from a volunteer's perspective. We try to do things with historic accuracy, attention to detail, that sort of stuff. And as such, our culture is really shaped around that sort of thing. And as far as administration stuff, our volunteer makeup is, we roughly have probably around 40-50 volunteers that are kind of our full-time volunteers. They're at the railroad at least twice a month. 40 to 50 that are occasional volunteers, once or twice a year. And then there's another, a third of that, another 40 or 50 that are, come by once a year or once every couple of years, especially for our big work weekends that we're well known for, apparently. As far as management, we have a president, board of directors. They oversee the kind of day-to-day stuff. And then we have 3 superintendents that manage railroad buildings and grounds, and then the individual volunteers who want to do work report under those under that structure. So I, for example, as trainmaster, report to the superintendent of the railroad.
Very good. So it's great to hear that you come from these different perspectives and have such interesting collective histories. Volunteering in rail preservation, I think one of the great big questions that many organizations across the country and probably even around the world have. And what better place to start talking about this than the question of where to find folks? Kate Kratville-Wren asks, through what avenues do you find your current volunteers? Friends of friends, members of your organization, events, social media, volunteer events, railroad/model clubs, etc. Let's start with you, Kristen.
So
All of the above.
I can more tell you where not to. When I first started, I spent an entire year hitting every model railroad show, every Railroadiana show, every train event in every town in the Midwest, setting up a table, getting the loop going behind me, and trying to preach, come work on what you love so much. And come to find out, the people that go to these model events, if they're not already coming to your events, they were the wrong crowd. We sold a few hats, but we never got a sustainable amount of volunteers out of that, or anybody that was willing to do any work for anything other than showing up to be seen once or twice or to take a few pictures. So what I've learned is that it's all about analytics with the people that already want to be around your trains or around your museum. We've had the best luck with exit surveys from our passengers and from our membership base that doesn't actively volunteer. What is it that made you interested in us from the jump? If you paid for a ticket, why not get the opportunity to do this for free and go a little bit above and beyond what most people get to do, volunteer? Or if you're a member, what is keeping you from taking that next step to become an active volunteering member, which is a hard hurdle for a lot of people to pass. And I think it's just because we don't ask. More often than not, I'll have a member comment something on a Facebook post or to an email we send out, and a quick phone call usually turns into nobody's ever asked me before. And that's where we get most of our new volunteers from. That well will run dry eventually, but that is currently the prime area of obtaining new people.
So one thing I'd say, and Kristen hit it in the voiceover there, was all of the above, certainly. One thing that we had a good success story with was there are websites that will take volunteer listings, and they're a pain to fill out and all of that sort of stuff. And for the most part, you get nothing. But hey, we got a really, really good dedicated volunteer out of that one time. And that person has made a very valuable contribution to the railroad in the few 2 or 3 years that she has been part of our organization. And so that's, I think, so some of people want to talk about expanding demographics. Part of how to expand your demographics is to look outside the box a little bit for where people are, and that was just that's just one thing that we had one good success, but man, it was a good one. And then the other thing was, I noticed for us, we get a lot of volunteers by putting the word out for work events. Hey, we're going to have this big giant fall work weekend. Here's the event on Facebook, and publicize it not just to your membership, but to the same people that ride your trains or come to visit your museum. I think Chris, you were talking a little bit about that. Is making sure you engage the people that have come, and then invite them to come and work on the railroad. We have a program called You've Been Working on the Railroad, and it's just a branded volunteer day. Come paint a boxcar, or come work on the track, or that sort of stuff, and it makes a low barrier of entry. Speaking of low barrier entries, I think you want to make sure that you eliminate as many of those barriers of entries as you physically can. For our events, we don't require any membership. We don't have any age limits, disclaimers, limitations, nothing like that. I understand that other organizations may have insurance requirements. We're fortunate in that our insurance does not require us to say you have to be a member or you have to be a certain age or all this sort of stuff. So if you can, if those excuses are in there artificially, get rid of them. That's what I would recommend.
Yeah, same really at the Pennsylvania Trolley Museum. Our visitors are where we get a lot of our volunteers. And as a paid staff member, I feel like I'm less equipped to tell somebody why they should spend their time at the museum for free. And our volunteers really are our best recruiters. And we try to equip them with the tools to recognize people who are asking questions and recognize people who are really interested in these topics and who might make good volunteers. So they'll send them to me or get their contact information. And I would say visitors are a major source of our volunteers. In addition to our operator for an hour programs, we let people take the controls of a trolley with an instructor for about an hour. And a lot of these people get it as a birthday gift or a Father's Day gift. And they're like, hey, I actually kind of like this. So we'll invite them back to do full operator training. And so that's where we get a lot of our operators.
Do you find that you get a lot of turnover from that? Because at our museum, we don't offer that program per se. So I'm curious as to, do you get, what's the ratio roughly of volunteer for throttle time or operator time versus a turnover to a volunteer?
I would say it's not too many of them, but we email and follow up with everybody who does it. So I would say probably 10 of our regular operators have done the operator for an hour program out of 50 or so. So it's not everybody, but it's definitely, a source of potential.
That's a significant number.
We do similarly. We do the Hostler experience, where we take a whole day immersive experience. People pay for the privilege of being able to do all the grunt work to get a steam engine fired up for the day and running. And it's a hard day. It's a lot of work. And most of our volunteers are happy to sit back and teach instead of doing the actual work. And we've done that for 2 years now. And in those 2 years, we've passed 24 people through that program. And I've gotten 8 of the best, most consistent volunteers that we currently have from that program. So it's pretty high. It's a pretty high percentage. I wouldn't say maybe it's not a numbers game, but it's a quality game. People that are willing to put in that day worth of work and then willing to come back and do it again for free, they seem to be working out.
Yeah, you can't pay me enough to do this.
I actually started out as a visitor myself. In Atlanta, I was visiting the Southeastern Railway Museum and just for something to do. And I was like, this collection is really neat. This stuff is really cool. Didn't know anything about trains or anything at the time, and reached out to the volunteer coordinator and ended up getting hired instead. But that's, visitors are a great source of volunteers.
So, Kristen, that ties in with a question from Brian J. Smith. What's your sales pitch to people to volunteer with your organization who you sense are not your typical rail fan or gearhead? Obviously, in that case, it sounds like you reached out to them, but given that you come from that perspective, what have you learned along the way as good ways to appeal to people who might not otherwise think of trolleys?
Sure. I mean, you're inviting them not just to volunteer, but to be part of an organization, right? To be part of the social activities, the camaraderie with everybody at the museum. And, at the end of the day, volunteering is partially about the work and partially about all the friendships that you make and the fun that you have while you're there.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. A lot of people describe that the WWNF as a family atmosphere, and the sense of accomplishment when you get done. Some people have even called it, for those who have done service projects or mission trips or something like that, it's just a secular mission trip or something of that nature. And it really can build that sense of community, that sense of trust among your people, and you just can't put a dollar amount on that. That's just to get that level of commitment from folks to do something that's frankly, should have, if you look at it from a practical standpoint, should have been lost a long time ago. But here we are, running 100-year-old trains and trolleys and stuff of that nature. And to do that, it really takes a railroad. It takes everybody to participate. Everybody, there's a place for everyone with it, especially within an all-volunteer organization. If you don't have a paid staff to run the gift shop, you need people to run the gift shop. If you don't have a paid staff to do the administrative work, you need to do the administrative work. I got piles of administration work off to my camera here. And some people, they come, at least for our case, they want to give what they do professionally. Hey, I'm a computer guy. I want to do the computer stuff. Or, hey, I'm the computer guy and I do not want to do the computer stuff, and want to make sure that you create, you find out what the volunteer is interested, what they want to do, and more importantly, what they don't want to do, and then foster it from there. I think that's how your sales pitch, if you will, has to be.
You both said exactly what we have a term for here. Everybody knows me as the person for the warm and fuzzies. Your volunteers all walk away with the warm and fuzzies. No matter what work you did and hard work you did, that it's building up to that excursion, that event that you're going to do, where at the end of the day, you're going to go take a breath and say, that was worth it. So many happy people, so many people that you've impacted and touched, whether you knew you could or not. That's enough for most people if you do it right.
We all need the warm and fuzzies. Even if we don't want to admit it, I think that we all need that once in a while. Getting into a logistical question, Chris Van Tol asks, how do you communicate with your volunteers? Crew call, work days, scheduling, what are particular tools that you use? Let's start with you, Ed.
Sure. First of all, we try to keep a consistent schedule, by reducing those barriers of entry, rather than say, well, show up on this Thursday at such and such a time. Oh, and the next month it's on Tuesday because Frank can't be there. And then, no, at our place, we have consistent volunteer days every Saturday, Tuesday, and Wednesday. And, usually, unless there's, extenuating circumstance. Yesterday, Saturday, it was, -12 in Maine. So there wasn't a full volunteer crew there. That yesterday there was one, and he did office work. But still there was somebody there if somebody showed up, right? Just making sure everything is consistent. And then once people have their projects they're working on, then they can set their own schedule and they get the keys to the building and all that sort of fun stuff. But kind of making sure that there's something consistent. For our stuff, kind of intercommunication, we have a discussion forum. I know how year 2000 of us on our social media platform, but hey, it works. Is that we communicate with each other on our discussion forum, and it's an open forum. There's a members only section too, but it's an open forum that when somebody says, hey, I'd like to volunteer, I say, go check out this thread and read what's going on, and then if it sounds interesting, show up on a Saturday, Tuesday, or Wednesday, and it's all right there for them. And then other than that, we do have emails and that sort of thing. We do a crew caller for our train crews. I'm the crew caller, and what we have to do, what we do is it's a little different than most people, and I really want to hear what other people are doing in this regard. Is we have a sign-up sheet about 6 to 8 weeks out of listing the days that we're going to operate and the expected crew needs, and encourage people to sign up. Who are qualified, obviously, when you get into train crew things. Then after, when we're about a week out, I'll send an email out, say, hey, I need some help on such and such a date, and so on and so forth. And then when we get starting to get close, then the texts and phone calls start flying to fill in the remaining needs. And then we have some people kind of on reserve who can kind of jump in if need be. If we hit a particular slot that we know we're going to have some trouble filling. So that's how we do that. And I'd really like to know what other groups are doing, especially when it comes to doing volunteer tracking of hours, FRA, hours of service requirements, that sort of thing. Do you guys have a formal system that you do that? We just use a sign-in book and we tally all the hours by hand, and it's a pain. So I'd love to hear what anyone else has to say on that one.
Getting back to just how we communicate with our volunteers, we rely a lot on our department managers. So I mentioned earlier that our department managers are all volunteers. So like power and signal, maintenance, restoration, and they kind of have their crew that they send out work session info to. It usually happens to be on the same day, but as far as volunteers communicating with each other, instead of a message board, we have a volunteer Facebook group that they're all part of and constantly sharing updates in. A lot of times people will share work session info there. Not everyone has a Facebook though, so you got to be careful with that. As far as signing up, we use a pretty low-tech Google spreadsheet. So For our trolley operators for the entire year, we put out a Google spreadsheet. You can click the tab to which month you want to sign up for, and you just put your name in one of the boxes. And that has worked really well for us. We do that for other volunteer projects as well. So like if you want to sign up to be the Easter Bunny, you can fill your name out in this slot right here. But we really do rely on our department managers to kind of call the work sessions and communicate information to everybody in their department.
So I touch base on what you started with, Ed. Consistency is the number one most important thing when scheduling and communicating with volunteers. Everybody can set their watch or their calendar by what I'm going to post or put out on what day of the month or the week. And when you have that consistency, they know that it's reliable information they can always go to. So we don't have a discussion board. We don't have a Facebook group that we use. We actually keep it pretty low tech. We have a members area of our website that has an active calendar on it that all of our project managers can update and say, on this date, I'm going to be replacing the generator on the power car. I need 4 people. And then it's on the calendar, and then people know they can reach out to that project manager directly, or they can reach out to me if they don't know that project manager, and then I'll act as the middleman to connect them to it. But that seems to work out really well. It means a lot of one-on-one communication, which falls on myself and the membership team. It's not just me. Myself, Brad Morocco, and Samantha Krumanacher all handle all of the membership and volunteer communications. And sometimes it's as simple as, yeah, show up at 2:00 on Sunday. This project is doing this, and you will be welcome, and your help will be welcome. But for the most part, it's just a general, consistent, reliable, I can look and see what's going on and I can join in on that. Now, as far as actually scheduling, when it's not just work sessions at the shop, if we're running an excursion or an event, we actually started last year, we started using this application called When I Work. It's actually a employment scheduling software for small employees. And we do pay for it. It's not free. They do give us a discount as a nonprofit. You pay per seat. Being the size that we are, the most that we ever pay for is 200 seats during the season, and it's very reasonable. But what I really enjoy about it is I put the schedule out, or the project manager puts the schedule out. So like, let's say we're running an excursion with 765 and we need people in the consist behind the engine, and we need engine crew, and then we need conductors and engineers. I'll handle everything behind the engine. Our chief operating officer will handle all of the engine crews, and our crew chief will handle the engine crews. They'll put a schedule skeleton up, and then people that are qualified for a position can hop on that schedule and say, I want this shift on this day. And then the manager approves or denies that until we have a full schedule. And then this gives some accountability to it as well, because one of the biggest problems with volunteers is, how do you hold people that you aren't paying accountable? If a group of volunteers don't show up and you can't run, that's a problem. And if you're not paying them, what are you gonna do, fire them? So by committing to a shift in this software, they've committed to show up for it, and they confirm available for it, and they have a 48-hour window before it to find a replacement if they need to. And then we have policies if you miss shifts, or if you don't no-show a shift, that will limit your ability to volunteer in the future. It's worked out really well. But that's just step one. You also asked about tracking hours. We also still keep hours the old-fashioned way. We have a form on the website that you can fill out, and it's database. Our secretary on the board takes care of it once a month, or there's a book in the shop that you fill out, and once a month he takes the page out, takes it home, and keys it by hand. There is better software out there. I know there are better options out there, but the database management takes a ton of time. And I'll be frank, if I wasn't a volunteer, if I was getting paid to do it and I could sit down for 3 days of my life and commit to just transferring everything over, there are better options. But being that we're all volunteers, we make do with what we have. And sometimes low tech works. It seems to work really well.
We use at the Pennsylvania Trolley Museum, we use Volgistics, which lets everybody track their hours digitally themselves. And yes, it was a lot of work at the start to import all those volunteer files into that. But I will say it's saving me hundreds of hours at the end of the year, putting people's time in manually so that we can add it all up. But Volgistics also has a scheduling system. We don't use it yet. Maybe that's a goal in the future. But I have found that tracking hours is something that our volunteers did not want to do, But now it's easy. It's like on your computer, you can do it on your phone. We do have a couple people who still do it on paper because they don't have a computer at home. But for the most part, I've managed to get people who never tracked their hours before tracking their hours now, which I think is a big accomplishment.
I think we've all got a few of those.
Amen.
It seems to me that it's a matter of meeting people part way, because anybody who's gone into digital technology has had to transition at some point in time. Ergo, it's just a question of how much you've transferred over and how much you're able to encourage your member base to be able to take advantage of those new tools. The Strasburg Railroad is an institution in the heritage railroad industry, and its mechanical services department is proud to lead the way. With the knowledge and experience that has created one of the most reliable steam railroading experiences in the country, the Strasburg Railroad is excited to offer their expertise to the rest of the industry. Strasburg's professional team provides consulting and technical assistance to take your steam locomotive or railcar project from idea to finished product. They stand behind their work and always strive to meet their customers' needs for quality, historic accuracy, and reliability at a price that is fair. Unlike many competitors, they feature a fully equipped boiler, railcar, and machine shop, so the work gets done in-house, helping you to get more for your money. Send your inquiries to mechanical@strasburgrailroad.com and let the professionals get to work for you. Looking at some of the challenges, because boy, are there many when it comes to volunteerism. Chris Eden Green asks, given the increases in overall cost of living and strenuous availability of, I think he means like overextending the availability of existing labor, what measures can be taken to help retain long-term volunteers going forward? Let's start with you, Chris.
So this is a tough one. What I tend to lean on the most for this is that culture breeds opportunity. If you've got a good group of volunteers that are all there for the same common goal, chances are there's going to be a lot of friendships forged in fire with your volunteer group. And the more that happens, you'll start to realize that couches become available, that carpooling becomes available. I'm not sure for both of you, but I assume most of your volunteer base travels a good chunk to get to you. Same with us. Most of our volunteers are from out of state. We have 150-ish active volunteers when we're operating, and I would say over 100 of them are from more than 100 miles away. So a happy environment and a happy culture and friendship and camaraderie between volunteers seems to alleviate that. Don't get me wrong. I wish we had a huge pile of money and I could just buy a flop house for everybody and put everybody up and hire them a chef and take care of all the expenses that keep people from coming. I wish I could pay everybody's time off so that they could come volunteer with us, but it's just not realistic. So it's just leaning on your fellow volunteer, is my opinion. That's going to be your biggest asset, is people that are willing to give.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Culture is everything. I mean, that's one of the biggest strengths of our organization. That said, yeah, when the recession hit, we felt it in our volunteers. So we looked into what we could do to, hey, can we not have, a drop off of volunteering? And it turns out it's not as easy as it would seem. As simple as getting gas cards to somebody to as a sense of reimbursement. You have to get the IRS involved, and then you have to make sure it's not construed as any sort of compensation or anything like that. So it gets tricky really quickly, and then it could also affect that the atmosphere, their sense of camaraderie. Hey, how come he got a gift card and I didn't? And that sort of stuff. So we backed off on that real quick, but we did make a couple changes. For example, one of the things that we make sure we have at least every Saturday is there's a hot meal available to our volunteers. And it used to be like put $3 in the bin and $5 or whatever. We made sure that meal is there consistently, and then we made the donation very optional. So if it's just an expense that we're going to take on as an organization to make sure we've got food, drinks, and snacks available to our volunteers. Especially like I say, when when you're working on a cold day of Maine, you want to have a hot meal available to you, and the leftovers during the week, right? We do fortunately have some availability for stays overnight at our facility. It's not high class by any, it's a bunkhouse just like any other railroad would have. But again, we got rid of any sort of expectation of fees for that, so that if people were coming a distance, and we're probably about 50-50, those that are within commuting distance to the railroad versus those who come from a good far away. So made sure that was available. And then kind of feeding back onto that is we listened to what volunteers were saying, hey, Ed, hey, it was really a pain when you do this, when I do this, when you change this thing about the train schedule. Like, oh, I didn't even realize that was affecting you. I will not do that anymore. So asking the volunteers, hey, what's holding you back from, I noticed you weren't here, as often. How come? And, it might be, well, my aunt was sick and I was taking care of her. Fine. Or it was, hey, Ed, you're making me sick and I need you to back off on this. Okay. Yeah, I can fix that, the other one last thing we did was we hadn't done a lot of volunteer recognition. That was one of our big misses as an organization. We didn't have any sort of even pins of years of service or any acknowledgement of that. So we started doing that last year with the years of service. And a few years ago, we had a big award that we give out to people who have gone above and beyond the organization. So, not these big award banquets or that sort of stuff. And I'm not sure that those work. I'd love to hear if other people find that those things work, but just making sure you say thank you and, just the little things, right?
I think thanking them is one of the biggest things you can do, whether it's through an email, in person, a phone call, that's super, super important. And, back to the original question, I think as a result of, the labor market and things nowadays, a majority of our volunteers are retirees or, people with other sources of incomes or students. So we're kind of lacking the folks in the middle a little bit, which I think is pretty common across the industry. But exactly what Chris and Ed were saying, social activities are something that our volunteers always want. I'll ask people, how can we improve the volunteer experience at the Pennsylvania Trolley Museum? More picnics and more food. So we always make sure we have pizza or sandwiches or something available for the folks who are working our special events, which are very taxing. And we give everybody a name tag for their uniform. We're going to be ordering shirts for everybody at some point soon. And we submit our volunteers' hours to the President's Volunteer Service Award, which recognizes their service kind of on a national level, which I think kind of creates a sense of, that people feel like it's a lot more important, first of all, to track their hours, but also that they're contributing to the organization as a whole. This year, we've also started doing volunteer field trips. So, for example, I arranged a trip later this month to the Pittsburgh airport. We're going to go check out the people mover system there. I just sent an email to the people at the airport and they said, yeah, sure, bring 20 people and we can go check it out. And we're going to go to some other museums kind of as a volunteer exchange program to see how other places work. So I think keeping it fun and interesting for the volunteers is also a way to retain them long term.
It's funny you mentioned that because we actually have a group. Everybody that participated this past summer in the Rail Experience was invited. Next Friday, we're all going to tour the restoration shops at the Wright-Patterson Museum of the Air Force in Dayton, Ohio. So yeah, field trips are a big thing. I wanted to tack on a little bit to what everybody was kind of alluding to it here, though. You said you're missing that middle chunk. People tend to be real active and then disappear, and then they come back later in their life. A real successful way that we found to retain people from start to finish is to make sure that there's a clear path for them to become the leaders of tomorrow. So yeah, financial needs are one thing, but you also have some internal needs, some things that you need satisfied to feel valued within an organization. And I'm really proud of our clear-cut path where somebody can walk in our door and say, this is neat. how do I get to do what you do? And there's a very obvious step A, B, C, D to get there that's achievable. If you want to fire a big engine in Fort Wayne, you just have to put in the time. There's no secret to it. You just have to put in the time and make it known that that's what you want to do. If you want to take my spot, please, and volunteer coordination, you just have to make it known and put in the time. A clear-cut path really seems to help with retention in this time when people are trying to decide how to give their time, because it's so valuable now.
It is very valuable, and I'm really glad to hear you talk about that, Chris, because I think that a philosophy that I've adopted is ask not what your volunteer can do for your organization, ask what your organization can do for your volunteer. I think that for a long time we've operated solely under both the just general understanding that, hey, our volunteers want to be here and they want to play with our toys and that kind of thing. And that's still true. But I am strongly of the mind that increasingly we need to be thinking about what can we be giving to our volunteers in terms of the skills that they can retain. And clearly I'm not the only one thinking about this. The apple does not fall far from the tree, because my mom, Elizabeth Ozrak, asks, how do you specifically encourage young people, teens and up, to volunteer, learn skills, and take on responsibility? And Chris, you addressed this a little bit. Kristen, what are your thoughts?
You got to put them in charge of stuff. Actually, we have a couple projects at the museum right now. Major restoration projects on our Red Arrow Car 73, for example. The entire project is being led by like a 21 or 22-year-old and like a 32-year-old, of course, with supervision from folks who have been there longer. But the people leading the charge are the young people, and it's kind of become like the project that all of the youth swarm towards. So putting the youth in charge of things, like actually listening to their input, and recognizing that I think the youth have different memories than the people who started the museum, right? Like when the collection first started, the members were preserving their memories, and the volunteers joining now have different experiences and memories. So the older people, they might not think the same way as the younger people, but getting everybody on the same page and, fostering kind of mentorship and opportunities like you guys were saying is a really good one. Also, having young people in your marketing photos. When you're posting volunteer photos on Facebook, you don't want to have, like, no offense to the seniors, but like you want to make sure you have a good representation of your volunteers in there so that they know they're not the only ones. I think a lot of, for example, high schoolers, they may be the only person in their high school that they know of that really likes trains or really likes trolleys. And they're like, where do I find this community? They may have a community of people online, right? And so whenever we get someone from high school or college who's interested in volunteering at the museum, I make sure to introduce them to all the other young people around so that they immediately know they're not the only one and this is a place where they can fit in.
I'm going to take it a notch down a little bit and say not only teens, but we've got volunteers at the WWNF that are under 12. And I completely and totally disagree with this sentiment that young people should be engaged in railroad preservation because they're the future. All right. Let me say that again. I disagree with saying that they are the future. Instead, I say young people, 20 and down to less than 10, can be actively engaged in volunteering today and be just as valuable volunteers as somebody who has been there for 20, 30, 40, or 50 years. Now, does that present challenges? Yes, of course, right? You don't put the 10-year-old in the cab of the steam locomotive, right? But you can have them ring the bell with their dad is holding on to them, right? And that creates a memory, okay? And can they help with the sweep ups? Absolutely. Can they help with these things? There are ways. We've got one volunteer. He started by shoveling out the ash pit. All right. And he struggled with it, but he filled up the buckets and he was happy to do it. And we were happy to have him do it. Believe me, right? Nobody wants to be shoveling out the ash pit, but he was happy to do it. Why? Because we could actively engage that. And then he could ring the bell at the end of the day. And then pretty soon, guess what? he was well enough that he could drive the tractor on his dad's lap that hauls the buckets of the ash to the ash pit. Right, and then and it goes on from there. Now he knows our rule book better than most of our brakemen do. So now, is he a full-fledged brakeman? No, because he's still too young. But that doesn't mean he can't be actively engaged. All right, and that's just one example. We've got several, but I really want to impress upon people that if you think that kids can't be engaged and engage them safely, I think that you might want to look at that. It's really something that if everybody here, we're part of a nonprofit, and that means we're probably education is high on our list of mission values, right? Well, there it is, right there. It's not just educating the people that walk in the door and press the button on the model train to make it go around. It's about engaging the people to come in and learn the skills, learn what it took to run a railroad back 100 years or a trolley system 100 years ago, or a mainline steam locomotive 100 years ago. I think that's key. And it kind of a corollary to that is we got to be, if you're going to have kids around, you got to scale back a little bit on the railroader language a little bit, make sure that things stay a little family friendly. But if you do that, I think all your volunteers will appreciate that anyways. We
just to kind of tag on that a little bit, you were both 100% spot on in my opinion. Trust. Too many people think, oh, you're just a kid, you don't understand it. We just recently had to put a new small project manager in place because our last one just graduated high school and left state for college. And he'd been a project manager for 3 years, and he just graduated high school. And he did good things. He did good work. We definitely, you got to trust the kids, man.
Yeah, and to piggyback on that, when you're investing in kids and young adults and teens and so forth, yes, they go off to college, and yes, they go and they go do other things. So what? You've done the greater good of doing rail preservation and furthering the cause. If they start at the WWF and they go off to Fort Wayne or they go off to Pittsburgh Trolley Museum, great, fantastic. That's I couldn't be happier, right? Because that's eventually somebody's going to come and have had a good experience somewhere else. So that's don't be afraid to invest in people and expect that you're going to get the return from that particular person. It's about investing to the greater good of the causes that we care so dearly about.
And I'm going to build off of what everybody said and say, if you're having success stories, get those out there, whether they be testimonials from the volunteers themselves or their parents. Make sure you are communicating that in your volunteer section of your website. Talk about what skills that you can guarantee that they learn. So it's not just, oh, you can have fun playing with our trains, but that these are things, especially to Chris's point about these are things that we can guarantee. When you know that this is enough of a true statement amongst your volunteers that it is essentially a guarantee, putting that out there is so vital. This episode of the Roundhouse is brought to you by Rail and Road Auctions. You can find all types of railroad collectibles, including signs, signals, horns, locks, keys, lanterns, timetables, passes, and more. With opening bids of only $10 on many lots, you'll be sure to find something to add to your collection or train room. Rail and Road also offers fast and easy shipping right to your doorstep, and they combine multiple live and online sales methods to allow you a variety of purchasing options. Their next auction is March 9th and 10th, 2023, and you can view the full catalog now at www.bidrar.com. That's bidrar.com. Rail and Road Auctions, where real railroaders and rail fans build their collections. Let's turn our attention to a big question that I think taps into the core of a lot of organizations and how they see themselves and how they are operated, and that is volunteers and paid staff. Travis Gordon asks, what are your thoughts on integrating volunteer staff and paid staff, as well as transitioning volunteers into paid staff? Let's start with you, Chris.
So I take a very weird pride in the fact that there's nobody paid in Fort Wayne and that we achieve so much. But I've started to become a little bit more introspective of that. And I think this is what becoming middle-aged is. You start to look at the longevity of things and you start to realize that that might not be sustainable if you want to grow. Sure, we could continue to have an engine that does an excursion a year or goes and does something every other year. That's neat and everybody gets excited for. But we've made no secret that we're trying to grow and find ourselves a home base. And I don't see how that could happen with volunteer staff. The integration is needed. I think the hybrids are the best that I've seen. There are some pretty amazing operations out there that I've seen have operate with combination of volunteers and paid staff. Not to put anybody on blast, but they're doing it well, so I think they would appreciate it. The Lebanon Mason Monroe down just north of Cincinnati does it very well. The Allen Maples Railroad, the Everett Railroad does it very well. And what I've witnessed is that a volunteer is a foot in the door. And then if you want to make a living of that, the opportunity is there. Because there are some people that don't want to be more than a volunteer, that don't want to be more than the casual weekend warrior for these types of things. But the people that have a keen interest in it, giving them the opportunity to actually be paid and maybe make a career path out of it is pretty exciting. I almost use some of that railroad language there to express how exciting. But like myself, like I'm a prime example. So 7 years ago, full-time job, volunteer doing this. I was new to all of it. And as of 2019, I make a living with trains and I still don't get paid for Fort Wayne, but it's because of my experience in Fort Wayne that I've been able to turn it into a career path. And I know that this is it for me now. I know that it's this until the day I die, and I am very content with that. And it just makes me wonder if we're not making that path available to other people by limiting people to volunteer status only. Maybe a little too introspective, but that's the way I look at it.
Yeah. Again, all volunteer, except, the occasional contractor and that sort of stuff here. But, we're really worried about how that might upset our culture, making that switch. Because for, our organization, we have a home base and, we're trying to operate year round and all that sort of stuff. And it does get challenging to make sure that, everything gets done. And thankfully we don't have, we're talking about people that, no shows and that sort of thing. That very rarely happens with us, which is great, and when it does, it's a true emergency. But for the most part, we're at this point in our organization's career or status, as Trainmaster, I can schedule dates and run, say, okay, we're going to run pumpkin trains. Okay, we're going to run them every Saturday in the fall. Great. I'd love to run them every Saturday and Sunday in the fall, but I don't have the crew to do it. So, should we do that? And I'm also getting the feeling that talking to other organizations that do the paid crew thing, they're having trouble finding crew just as much. It's the paycheck doesn't seem to matter that much. It does, for certain people, obviously, if you're coming from a distance or you need to make, put bread on the table. But is it really that big of a deal? I don't know. I'm really interested to hear what I'm actually interested to hear what Kristen has to say on this one.
Yeah, so I guess the Pennsylvania Trolley Museum is in a bit of a different position than you guys. We have 7 full-time staff and 1 part-time. It did not start that way. In the early 90s, they hired an executive director, Scott Becker, who was actually still at the museum. And I think this is my personal feelings, but I think the transition cannot be a popularity contest. It can't be an issue of sweat equity either. Like it's going to be a very delicate balance at first. So, you can't just hire the person who the board all likes. Like it's really, I think, tricky to start. I don't know, because I've never been at an organization at that point, but I think as soon as you start that transition, you're going to need somebody to take on the role of volunteer coordinator, to manage that transition and keep the volunteer staff tension to a minimum. And I feel like that's a major part of my job at PTM, even though we've had staff for a long time. kind of continually reassuring volunteers that, staff's not there to make it any less fun or disconnect them from their passion for trolleys. We're just, honestly, the staff is here to do stuff that the volunteers probably don't want to go out and do, like fundraising and staffing bunny trolley and pumpkin patch trolley and all of these things. So, I think when you're first starting out, it's really important to keep a balance of staff who is there to help make money, and also the volunteers who are helping you carry out your curatorial and educational mission so that you don't, turn into a theme park or, Disney World. So I'm not sure because I've never been at that point, but I can say that it works really well at the Trolley Museum. And we also still have volunteers who are, like I mentioned a couple of times, department managers. So they're still running things, and nobody's trying to take that away from them. But it's all about a balance, I think.
Do you ever have conflicts between a paid staff member and a volunteer who want to do the same thing at the same time, sort of thing? And if so, how do you resolve those?
That's a good question. I mean, there's always a lot of it comes from backing up. We did have one volunteer transition to paid staff. That's our director of facilities, operations, and safety. So our basically operations manager is now paid. He's 40 now, and he was a volunteer since he was 13. And so, we do have some of that. And, but when it comes to conflicts, I guess, between volunteers and staff, I think people are usually able to talk it out, and there's no hierarchy really, you're paid staff, so your opinion matters more. It's more, because we're still, we still have a board of trustees with a lot of volunteers on it. It's very well balanced. That was a very poor answer to your question.
Well, the organizations that I've seen where volunteers and paid staff seem to work well together, it kind of goes back to, I think there's an underlying thing to everything we've been talking about. It goes back to a really good culture, and there doesn't seem to be the conflict because that underlying culture was already there. I'm sure at the Trolley Museum, everybody's there for a common goal, so nobody's going to get anybody's grill as long as it's towards that common goal. The one thing that worries me though, and Ed, I kind of wanted to tap in there because it actually affects you personally. You had a volunteer that, boy, do I wish I could have hired, and another railroad did hire him. And I loved working with the guy. He was a hard worker. And I know if he was a volunteer at Fort Wayne and he went to go work somewhere else to take a paycheck doing the same thing, I'd be very happy for him, but I'd also be really bummed out that we lost such a quality volunteer. And that's where I think having somebody that you can put into a leadership position to get paid, not necessarily a entry-level volunteer position that gets paid, but a leadership position that gets paid is really valuable because it retains your good people.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And yeah, we that's one of the things we struggle with is making, how can we retain people who decide that they want to make a career of this and then, want to go to, wherever that they can make a career out of it. And because we don't have leadership positions that are paid per se, it becomes tricky. So that's something we're hoping to, we're navigating, we just don't know.
We're in the same boat. And I don't think that anybody would disagree to say that at some point in the future, though, there probably will be paid positions to make sure that we retain talent.
Yeah, I tend to agree that, at some point our organization is going to have to face that. Right now we haven't, and, at some point, maybe.
I think, I'm sorry. I think one thing that probably helped at the start of PTM hiring its paid staff was basically hiring a rail fan as the executive director. Someone who understands the subject, but he also has a management background. So, not just a rail fan, but someone who has an appreciation for the history. And I think that's something you want to look for in any staff you hire. You don't have to only hire rail fans, but someone who is going to get involved with the organization and honestly, not treat it like just any other 9-to-5 job. Someone who cares about the collection, someone who, comes out and supports the volunteers on the weekend when they don't have to, or someone who is interested in going to the picnics. Would you hire an executive director at MoMA who didn't know anything about art? Probably not. I think the executive director probably needs some management experience and all that kind of stuff. But, I think for maybe organizations that are just starting out with paid staff, going with somebody who does have that appreciation for what your mission is already about is probably a good idea.
Going into something that you guys were talking about a little bit with regards to conflict, Mike Hune asks, what ways do you encourage new people to volunteer against a boys club mentality of old, i.e. fighting big egos? I'm going to extend that question to, how do you deal with internal volunteer conflict? Because that's something that I've seen too often, where organizations will go, yes, this person's problematic, but they have these skills. And personally, I don't think that's the solution. But I'm curious as to how you guys have handled such situations, starting with you, Ed.
So, yeah, I think the first solution is just don't have a boys club. It's pretty simple. Try to have a diverse group of volunteers across all ages, genders, abilities. And I'll go here, political persuasions. Volunteers have to leave their stereotypes and discriminations at home, period, and foster that environment. And then what do you get out of that? Well, you get to respect people as individuals for what they could bring to the organization, and kind of put aside what they might put on their personal Facebook page or on trade orders or YPN or whatever. And then over the course of as that friendship develops, maybe they can have a good, honest conversation about difficult topics off campus or privately. Heck, I have some very good friends through the railroad that I don't agree, that we have a saying, we agree on everything except for everything else. And because we agree on how the railroad should operate, but just don't ask us about the events of the day, let us say. But then we can have a good conversation about it, because why? We build up that respect for each other. Why? Because we have this culture of putting trains together and making this railroad happen. And then kind of corollary to that is, don't mouth off, when you're in public, right? It's you want to present yourself, and this goes to your staff, and this goes to your fellow volunteers. Don't be talking trash about some other organization or talking trash about your own organization. I mean, it seems simple, but people hear that stuff and they pick up on it very, very quickly. And, the rumor mill starts going, and then you start seeing it on the interwebs of, hey, they're having this problem with this piece of equipment because their journal box blew up or whatever. And you're like, no, you don't know the full story. So don't be, spreading that sort of crud around. Almost use that railroad language. Let's see. Also, put a policy and plan in place to deal with harassment and other unwanted behaviors. Have that in place now. I will tell you an absolute story. Nick did a great podcast on this, and I kind of listened to it and said, this will never happen at the WWNF. Guess what happened the next week? We had an incident, and we didn't really have a policy in place. Thankfully, we were able to mitigate it and put a policy in place and deal with the incident. And now we have that in place. So don't assume it's not going to happen to you, and put something in place and deal with things swiftly. And I don't want to say deal with it publicly, but make sure that people know that, hey, this sort of behavior is not tolerated. And that can be from, anything from harassment or, just pulling somebody, say, hey, that topic of discussion here, it's great you have that opinion, but let's leave that outside. All right. Here we want to keep things neutral. Right. And, you're going to have the bumper sticker from one party parked to the bump next to the bumper sticker at the other party in the parking lot. Guess what? That's a good thing. That's what you want to have. Have diversity of thought and people, and then getting to get people to respect one another through that. I think another thing you want to do is know which leaders are good at engaging new volunteers, right? let's flip this a little bit, is, the guy who likes to have the person, likes to have new people come and they'll show them the ropes and that sort of thing. Make sure you're pairing up the new people that come into the organization with those folks, and not with the person who likes to work alone and just wants to work on painting, scraping this particular boxcar or whatever, and let that person be, and then do that. And flipping it back to the kids and getting younger people involved, same thing, or different genders involved, making sure that if somebody isn't particularly good with kids, you don't put the 12-year-old on his team. All right, you just have that stuff in the back of your mind as you're coordinating volunteers and so forth. That hits all the things that I was thinking about. What about you guys?
I totally agree. If you don't have a structure around your volunteer program, then it makes it really hard to deal with any kind of issue that comes up. It's hard to fire volunteers, right? But if you have that structure in place, you can, if you have to. And I think, having an onboarding process is something that's really important. And honestly, I could do a better job of, but having a volunteer handbook that you can hand them, say, look this over, sign this saying that you read it. I don't know, maybe they will, maybe they won't, but you have that there as the expectations of your organization and what you expect from new people coming in and what you expect of everybody who's been there for decades as well. And I think, having an application on your website, like something as simple as that, like where people can go ahead and fill out their information, like something structured. Let's see, I was going to say, so the Pennsylvania Trolley Museum last year, we adopted core values. And it's this list of, things that we need to uphold and do as a member of the organization. And, our leadership made a video of themselves talking about them and reading them, and everyone has had to watch that. And I think that's been a really effective tool in, what we're expecting from people, to keep the gossip to a minimum and calling people out and all that kind of stuff. So that's been really effective. So if you guys don't have a core values adopted by your organization yet, I think that would be something really nice.
Yeah, structure. Everybody's been saying structure. Structure in twofold: structure of your policies and procedures, and structure in the way your organization is ran. Having clear-cut expectations and rules and a path if somebody is to divert from those. So for example, a disciplinary committee, if somebody is to do something that doesn't really represent the organization in the way that it should be represented, and it doesn't break something you have on paper, that's hard to enforce. But if you've got a code of conduct within your rules and your bylaws and your handbooks that people have acknowledged that they've received, then as much as it's a bummer, we've had to use it over the past few years, and it has negated what could have been very bad experiences by weeding out people that kind of snuck in as a snake in the grass, and we didn't realize we're there to try to undermine things, because you're going to have that. It's just unfortunate. It's just the way of the world. But then you can cut that off before it happens by having a structure of operation. So breaking things down into managers, which it sounds like we all do. It sounds like everybody has a project manager, a department manager, and having a structure and understanding, if you want to go do track work, then you're going to talk to person X, and that is essentially, for lack of a better term, your leader, your boss in the situation, and you're going to follow them to ensure that we achieve a goal. It prevents somebody from going all willy-nilly and saying, well, I'm going to do this, and just go off and do it on their own and do it wrong, misrepresent, maybe publicly say or do things that you wouldn't want to be said about your organization. A measurable amount of our volunteers are people that have, because they don't live close to us, that have organizations closer to them, and they've tried to enter, and they've come up against kind of a walled garden, which is the exact opposite of, I think, what we're trying to encourage internally. And I think that the three of us seem to be doing this, but there's still a lot of organizations out there that put up the wall, and it's the good old boys club, and we're here to play, and who are you? Who do you know? Why should you be here? And as long as organizations that want to succeed look at things in the opposite of that and put some type of structure in it to prevent that from happening, whether that be discipline, whether that be expectations, whether that be organization. I think that's the key to it, which I think everybody touched on.
One thing that we eliminated was the requirement for volunteers to be members. Of course, we encourage volunteers to be members because they're supporting the organization that way, but you don't want people to have to pay to be a part of the organization. We found that I think people were just not buying into that, and it was driving people away. Our membership dues are not that bad, but I think by inviting everybody to get involved rather than just the people who are going to pay to be there, essentially, is a way to get rid of some of those barriers.
Yeah, it's about eliminating barriers, right? Membership is, in my book, a artificial barrier, unless there is a legitimate reason for it. We decided that for if you're going to be on train crew, you should be a member of the organization. But any other volunteer position is open to anyone, and certainly because if you want to attract more volunteers, you got to attract from everyone, not just your membership base. So you're putting you can do we'll show up and we'll sign you up that day, and maybe somebody will even comp your membership. Yeah, you can do that, and there are plenty of good organizations that do it that way. But if you can eliminate those barriers, those paper barriers, eliminate them.
All very good. Last question that I have for you guys today is, what have been some unexpected benefits that have come out of your volunteers or their contributions? We'll start with Kristen.
So when I was looking at the questions, this one was a really hard one, actually. I think one of the most unexpected benefits has been the whole family getting involved. It starts with mom or dad, and then, they have kids, and their kid starts volunteering at the museum. And pretty soon the whole family is there. I think a couple of months ago, you had an episode with Art Ellis, who is 103 years old now. He is our oldest member number 5. His kids are at the museum, met the love of their life at the museum. Now the grandkids are at the museum. So I think that's one of the most unexpected things to me that comes out of the volunteer pool or volunteers is all this. The whole family can come out and everybody gets involved, and now your time spent at the museum is also family time, not just time away from your family, but time with your family.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Is that some of my best memories are times that I spent at the museum with my daughter when she was 6 and 10 and 16, and now she's off and living her life. At age 20, and now that's fine. But I had that time with her, and we had that. But I'll broaden that a little bit more. Is that you not only get your family time, but then you broaden your family in that you've got this core group of people that you have worked side, sweat, and tears with, and now when it's come time to pick up your house and move to Maine, you can call on them, and guess what? They're going to come and help, right? Or be there for we've had people, life happens, right? And people have developed friendships, and now you've got that core network of people you can count on to be there. And I know of at least 3 WWNF marriages, from 2 different volunteers. So those are unexpected benefits, So I think that's a really good thing.
Yeah, the friendships and the growth of your non-blood family is incredible. I always make the comment, who would I answer the phone for at 2 a.m? And most of the people I would answer the phone for at 2 a.m. are people that I have met, encountered, and worked with in my years doing this, because they are the people that I've become the closest to. And then much the same, if somebody that I didn't know was to come up to me and they were to use WWNF as a reference, I know WWNF is a good organization, and I will inherently trust them out of the gate. And I found that this works in the opposite direction as well. So many of Fort Wayne's members and alumni over the years have gone on to make incredible careers in the railroad preservation world, in the heritage preservation world. And it's because of that culture and that inherent family that was built during their time at Fort Wayne. You can touch almost any project on the eastern side of the United States, and there's a Fort Wayne person involved in some way or another. And I take a big sense of pride in that, because people trust our people, much like I trust your people. And I think that's one of the biggest surprises that's come to me, is how much a reputation can really help build up a good person and help them succeed in life.
Yeah, I agree completely. Chris is, I recently took a West Coast trip. I had never gone out that way before, and people I don't know, and I say WWNF, and all of a sudden there's that respect, and it's overwhelming to have that occur. But if you can encourage that and make that happen for your volunteers, by having a good volunteer program, having building up good trusted relationships, yeah, that's a great unexpected benefit, as the question was raised.
Excellent. Some really wonderful stories, some really wonderful advice in here. I thank all three of you, Chris, Kristen, and Ed, for joining us here today on the podcast. And thank you guys for tuning in as well. Hopefully, if you're part of an organization, you can kind of have taken notes from this and see, does your organization do this? Should they do this? As well as if you're looking to volunteer, these are the kinds of experiences that with the right organization, you can really benefit from. Thank you guys so much.
Thanks for
Thank
having us.
you.
That was fun.
And now, the question of the day.
Our next panel discussion on the Roundhouse is going to be focused on marketing, tourist railroads, nonprofits, fundraisers. The question of the day that I posed to you is, what are your questions pertaining to marketing? And what would you like to know from some of the leading experts in the field, or folks getting their first steps? Let me know on the roundhousepodcast.com. Links to social media there. Thank you guys for tuning in. And remember, as always, that the Roundhouse is our house.